And definitely that's a focus of our research program is we want to certainly advance, the science and technology, but we're always looking for useful applications that can really make a difference for people.
Welcome to the Crop Science Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Arnell. I'm the Precision Nutrient Management Extension Specialist at Oklahoma State University. Really excited to have one of my partners in crime, you might say, on the podcast with us today. He is Dr. Tyson Ochsner. He is a professor in our department, the Plant and Soil Science Department at Oklahoma State University, and his specialty is soil physics. Tyson, welcome to the Crop Science Podcast. And if you would, tell the audience a little bit about how you ended up as an Oklahoma native back in your home state.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Brian. It's really a great opportunity for me, so appreciate the chance to visit with you. I grew up in scenic Chattanooga, Oklahoma. Not everyone has had the privilege of passing through Chattanooga, but it's a wonderful little community in the southwest part of the state. Sits right across the border between Tillman and Comanche counties down there. And I grew up on a wheat and cotton farm down there that was settled by my great-grandfather in the Big Pasture land opening, which was the last land opening in the state. And my father's still farming down there, so making it work, which is not an easy thing to do. But so I grew up there on the farm and developed an interest in soil and water and soil water conservation, and came to OSU, did my undergraduate degree here. I started in biosystems and ag engineering, and when I got to the classes that spent like a semester drawing nuts and bolts, I didn't enjoy that so much, so I changed to environmental science. With a focus on water resources, and that was a good fit for me. But I was really closely associated with this department. So Dr. Jeff Hattie was here at the time, was my advisor. I did soil chemistry research with Dr. Nick Basta, took classes with Dr. Bill Ron, and so had lots of good experiences here in this department. Finished up and moved to Iowa State for graduate school. And that was a great experience. I married an Iowa girl, and so we enjoyed going to Iowa State for graduate school there in Ames, Department of Agronomy, master's and PhD in plant and soil science. And I worked with Bob Horton there at Iowa State, and that was a great experience. Learned a lot about soil physics, and so that's where I really developed my specialty in soil physics and hydrology. And when I finished up, I thought Iowa was really cold, and I didn't want to go anywhere north. And I remember distinctly getting in the car one day after church. My wife and I, we had a new baby, and we were like getting into the car, and the north wind was blowing down the Iowa plains there. And I said to my wife, I was like, well, if we're supposed to go any further north for my next job, the Lord's going to have to give us a big flashing red arrow because I don't want to go. And so you can guess where my next job was in Minnesota. So time came, and that was really maybe the only or certainly the best job opportunity available at that time. And it was a great time there. I worked for the USDA, the Agricultural Research Service, as a soil scientist in St. Paul, Minnesota. I was up there for 5 years working with John Baker and others. Phenomenal group. I learned a ton while I was up there, and had a great time, and thought maybe I would just be a Minnesotan from then on. I couldn't quite develop the accent, though. So 2008, there was this opportunity to come back to OSU, and put in my application and had the chance to come back here and be back in Oklahoma, and actually came same time as you. There were, I think, 5 of us hired that year in the department.
It was a big group.
Yeah, and I think you and I are the last two standing. So congratulations or condolences, however you want to look at it.
Explore the future of agriculture with KWS, a global leader in innovation and sustainable farming practices. Uncover the exceptional qualities of our hybrid rye, cultivating a legacy for a greener tomorrow. Visit kws.com/US for more information and for dealer locations. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
At least one just went to admin, but there's I think just three of the group. I think there might have been more than five. But I want to do a little bit of bragging or talk about what you've done. And so one reason I greatly enjoy working with you, and I even more appreciate that your original start in BAE or Biosystems Ag Engineering, because I've historically worked with so many ag engineers and on the engineering side, and I've been blessed to work with some amazing engineers that could communicate science and also understand application, while at the same time I've worked with a lot of engineers that had a disconnect from applied sciences and applied application. Same way as soil physicists. I've met some soil physicists that I would say lack a little bit of applied nature to themselves and the ability to reach out. And one of I greatly appreciate working with you over these years is that you take your upbringing and that background of growing up on the farm, and the products you produce through your research aren't things that are, I mean, there's some really out there and amazing forefront cutting, but you're also delivering applicable, usable products for the clientele of Oklahoma and really in the entire U.S., but focusing in the Great Plains.
Yeah.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about some of the stuff you've done? There's some things that I feel have great application, but also where you're going.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And definitely that's a focus of our research program is we want to certainly advance, the science and technology, but we're always looking for useful applications that can really make a difference for people. And so I'll just go back to 2008 when I was hired and go back to your former advisor, Dr. Ron, when I was just fresh on the job here, hadn't been here but a few months probably. And he showed up and said, "Hey, you've got to connect with these folks down at the Oklahoma Mesonet and find out, how you can work with them." And I was happy to do that. I already knew about the Mesonet and was thrilled to connect with them. And so Dr. Ron arranged that initial meeting and with Chris Febrick, who's the executive director for the Mesonet and others there. And it's just been a great partnership with them as we've been able to take the data that they already produce. We've learned how to get better soil moisture information from the Mesonet sensors that they already had. And then we've been able to use that information, a lot of different ways for developing, better drought monitoring approaches for different cropping systems. We've been looking at using that information for understanding wildfire danger. Wildfire is a big issue in the western part of our state. And so we need better wildfire danger ratings, and we're learning how to do that with the Mesonet data. And, stream flow forecasting, estimating groundwater recharge, just a variety of different applications that has opened the door to. And so that's been one of the areas of work that's been real fruitful for us, and I think helpful for others as well.
Before we go on too far, can you describe, because this is a pretty broad audience now, describe a little bit more in depth what the Mesonet, what is a Mesonet, right? Because that's not our term, it's a broad term, and there's many other states with them, but kind of describe ours and the Oklahoma Mesonet's role in other Mesonets around the nation.
Yeah, I will, and I'll do it with a story again because
stories are best.
When I first came here as an undergraduate, I won't give the year, but when my very first day at OSU, my very first class, the instructor was a man named Dr. Ron Elliott, the Biosystems and Ag Engineering Department, and Dr. Elliott here at OSU along with Ken Crawford at OU, were instrumental in starting this Oklahoma Mesonet. And the word meso is coming from the meteorological term called mesoscale, which means storm systems, weather systems that they're not the continental scale like that, or the global scale, and they're not at the micro scale, but they're in the middle. So meso means middle. So it's this middle kind of scale, kind of like a statewide kind of scale. And of course, network is an environmental monitoring network. So we have 120 stations across the state. We're monitoring every 5 minutes all these meteorological variables. So wind speed, temperature, pressure, precipitation. We're also monitoring soil moisture and soil temperature along with that. And we just celebrated our 30th anniversary for the Mesonet of collecting these data since 1994. So it's an awesome landmark for the Mesonet. And the Oklahoma Mesonet that those folks helped to start back in the 90s has become a gold standard. And other states have been able to take that pattern and emulate it and build on it. As a matter of fact, we have sent our people out to help other states do that, because it's always been about this collaboration and partnership from the start. So it's an awesome system.
And so the system, not only what I enjoy about the Mesonet system, or Oklahoma Mesonet, is that it's not only just collecting the data, is that they've built a system that has function. And so we're agriculture, right? So we can look at heat units, GDUs, we can look at soil moisture maps and all those things we use for agriculture. There's also lawn watering, there's smoke inversion, there's tons of free apps that can be utilized within this larger overarching system, both from the homeowner to the agriculturalist and agronomist, and even the cattle comfort if you start talking about livestock. And so there's a ton of information on this Mesonet. So it's a great resource to have, and the data is free for basically anybody.
They do such an awesome job of getting the information into usable packages, which is what you started off with. So this unique thing, I don't know if many other states can relate to this, but OU and OSU has traditionally been this huge rivalry, right? Well, we actually have an OSU employee at OU. So Wesley is down there at OU in the Mesonet office, and he's constantly doing extension work with the Mesonet information. And so that's just a great example of the kind of thing you're talking about. So it's been a great partnership.
Tell us about some of your current research, and you've got some, what I would say, stellar work that's out there if we look at some of the stuff.
Yeah. Well, some of it gets pretty far out there. I want to say one thing related to the Mesonet, and then we'll talk about some of our other projects. We had one of our new initiatives that I wanted to mention for folks is building off of the idea of the Oklahoma Mesonet, which is this great weather monitoring network. As we've been out and worked with agricultural producers across the state, one thing that's really clear, they also need really good information about water availability. And so they need better information about groundwater levels and how those are changing over time. They need better information about surface water levels and surface water availability in different places and times throughout the state. And so recognizing that, we have started this effort called the Oklahoma Hydromet. And so I'm really excited about that. We're in year one of that project. And the goal is to build a sort of parallel network to the Mesonet, but to have a gold standard integrated water monitoring network for the state that's going to be monitoring our soil water, our groundwater, and our surface water levels, and then packaging that into these kind of useful products like we were talking about. So I'm really excited about seeing how that one unfolds.
You're not the only one. I've been enjoying visiting with you about that project.
Yeah. So hopefully as that moves forward, we'll be able to, early in the season or ahead of time, give people better forecasts
Mm-hmm.
of their groundwater levels. We have in Oklahoma, we have some folks that irrigate out of shallow aquifers that are very responsive. They go up and down a lot, and they may not know before or during the season what the water level is in those wells, and folks, literally can just run out of water mid-season. And so we want to provide better forecasts for that kind of irrigation management application. Likewise, for if we look at Lake Altus Lugert down there in the southwest part of the state, they need to know, sort of in advance how much stream flow they can expect to have
Mm-hmm.
coming into the lake. And so we would be working on stream flow forecasting. If they get that information in advance, we can't tell the future, but we can talk about probabilities, and so provide that information and help them make better water allocation decisions. So that's an ongoing effort that I'm excited about.
That's going to be some great output, great products, and usable across a large swath of Oklahoma's clientele.
Yeah, hope so. But yeah, it's in terms of some of the other things that we do that's a little bit far out there.
Mm-hmm.
So we have been working on a USDA project to try to develop these integrated cropland monitoring systems. Okay, and these are we call these Chronos stations, and they're designed to be an all-in-one system that a person can take out after they plant their crop, set this thing out in their field, and have integrated measurements of their soil water content, their local weather conditions, their local rainfall, which varies so much place to place, and also have a continuous measurement of their crop development by monitoring that crop canopy. And so that's been an exciting effort to try to develop those. And we're on our second generation now. We're in the process of designing the third generation of these Chronos stations.
So with the Chronos, talk about some of the sensors. And I enjoy. So I've got a background in sensors. I've always enjoyed learning the pros and cons of different sensors. And so talk about some of the sensors that you have, the iterations of sensors you've used on Chronos, from very basic that you get off of Amazon to a little bit more complex.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can start with the most basic in a way is just to, get a camera out there to monitor that crop development. And so there's lots of different cameras on the market now. Some of them can survive outdoors, some can't. Some can reliably deliver data from remote locations, and some can't. And so anyway, we've been testing different camera systems and now developing our own camera system to overcome some of the limitations we've encountered. But the camera sits out there above the crop canopy and is taking photos multiple times a day and sending those back. And then we run those through an image processing algorithm that we have called Canopeo, and that measures the percent green canopy cover. So you can see, when those seedlings when that crop is first starting to emerge, you may be measuring 1, 2, 3% canopy cover. And then as that develops, hopefully towards a canopy closure in a lot of our crops, you'll be up to 100%. And that's going to tell you a lot about how that crop's developing and also how much water it's going to need based on the size of that canopy.
Well, and I'll stick with Canopeo a second longer. It's a product I've used for, it's been out available as a free app for a decade or better. I feel like it seems like it's been that
2015,
2015, almost there. And it's really cool for the audience. So what you have is an app. I have it on my iOS. It can be on Android. But it basically uses the phone's camera and just RGB. It doesn't need the NIR or any of the other spectrum RGB to basically isolate what I would describe as the green pixel and the non-green pixel. Is that appropriate?
That's right. Yeah. So in concept, it's real simple. It's just going to figure out what's green in that photo and calculate that as a percentage. And people have come up with all kinds of interesting things to do with that. So people have taken that, of course, to compare treatments in a trial. So they can they're doing a seed treatment trial or a fertility trial or something, and they can say, oh, look, in this treatment, I can already see this one's got 4% more canopy development or whatever. So you kind of get that quick response data on your trials. So that's cool. People do stuff like one guy came up with a way to measure the ripeness of canola because he was taking the seeds and seeing how many of the canola grains were still green, so he's using it that way. Somebody just published a paper using, this is one of my favorite ones, using it to study the suitability of habitat for Chinese pangolins.
You're dropping words I don't know.
Pangolin, it's like an armadillo type of animal, but it's a kind of an endangered animal in Asia. You got to look it up after the podcast. You're going to become a huge fan of pangolins.
I'm going to have to. They already sound fun to play with. So canopeo, I'll just say that is spelled Canopeo, Canopeo. What else do you have on the chrono stations besides just RGB cameras?
So we have the cameras can come from a lot of sources. There's a company that we've worked with quite a bit that has developed a really nice all-in-one weather station. So this is coming from the Meter Group out in Washington State, and they've got just a phenomenal sort of all-in-one integrated weather station. It can sit up right on the top of the station. It's got no external sensors sticking out that you have to mess with, but it measures a full suite of weather parameters: your rainfall, air temperature, wind speed, all the key things that we would want from a weather station. So we integrate that on the top. And then down below that, we put our cosmic ray neutron detector. And so this is the one that's a little bit more far out there in a way, because this thing doesn't touch the soil, but it's measuring the soil water content. So the basic idea of this detector is that it's measuring, or it's counting these subatomic particles that are called cosmic ray neutrons, and these things are around us all the time. We can't feel them, or we can't see them or feel them, but they're always there. They're around us. What's happening is they're coming in from outer space, and so these particles are coming in from outer space. They're actually mostly protons that come in at a very high energy. So that's like, if you remember your chemistry, that's like a +1 charge, particle that's coming in, and that thing's colliding with some molecule in the atmosphere, nitrogen gas probably, or something else in the atmosphere. And if it hits it the right way, it may knock a neutron out of that molecule, which the neutron has no charge. So it's uncharged. It can come out. And so it starts flying at a high rate of speed. Well, that neutron may hit another molecule, may knock out another neutron. And so you get like this shower of these things coming down to the ground surface, and they're moving so fast they can go right into the soil. And if they hit a water molecule down in the soil, it'll slow those things down, because water has hydrogen, and hydrogen is just a mass of 1, which is the same mass as a neutron. So when they hit each other, the neutron loses its energy, slows down, kind of like a cue ball that you hit into a rack of pool balls, so the cue ball stops and the other balls go. So the neutron loses its energy and it becomes a slow neutron. Okay. Now, above the ground surface, if there's a lot of these fast neutrons moving around, that means the soil must be pretty dry. There's not much water there to slow them down. And so we measure how many fast neutrons there are above the ground surface, and that's giving us an estimate of the soil water, not just at that point, but the whole field around us. This thing covers like 200 yards in every direction.
Yeah, that's been a concept. You've taught me this concept many times, and I learn and have to reappreciate it every single time. So that's really cool. So kind of pitch me because I know you well enough. I know there's a big picture goal on this. So if we move this through, and Chronos is as successful as I expect it to be, what do you see the outputs, right? How is this going to influence agriculture and well, how's it going to influence agriculture, farmers, ranchers, and such?
Yeah. Well, let me answer a different question first, and I'll answer
Yeah.
that one. Okay. Because
No.
I think we've got sort of at least a couple different end users in mind
Mm-hmm.
here. Okay. So as we develop these stations, we're continuing to try to improve the robustness, the portability, and drive the cost down. So that's one thing we're trying to do. We want to get them to a point to where they'll be really, really useful for other researchers like you and
Of
me.
course. Yeah.
I mean, who wouldn't love to have this thing that you can send with your student? Hey, go put this
Yeah.
out in the field and leave it there, and we'll have all the data we need for that site.
Oh, every year I look at the cost of weather stations for every location. It's like, I just can't do that.
So that would be a lot of value to all kinds of different researchers. Okay, that's one thing. But to your point, what about our farmers? What
Mm-hmm.
about our producers? How would they use this? And honestly, I got to give credit to one of the farmers that you and I both work with. Brent Rendell had a great comment on this, and I think he's right. And this is the direction that we would intend to head. Is that with these stations, okay, yeah, you're measuring. I've got this station. I can measure this one field, okay, but I have 10 fields or 100 fields I'm responsible
Mm-hmm.
for. Okay, and so how do I use that information at these other locations? And so there, I think we'll be looking at creative ways where we merge the data from the in situ stations with appropriate models and remote sensing data so that we can provide site specific corrections. Because we know every model is wrong, every remote sensing product is inaccurate or too coarse. They all need to be corrected. And so this would be a way you get a correction for your farm, for your location.
Would this be the approach of like a weather underground where you're using a lot of maybe privately owned weather stations to correct a larger model?
Great. That's another great idea. I hadn't thought of it that way, but if for example, you had a significant number of stations out there that different individuals were
Mm-hmm.
operating, if they agreed to collaborate in that way, then the data would have so much more power because you could start to have a region-wide, corrected product that's valuable to
Mm-hmm.
everybody. So definitely.
We've been chasing, or I've been going to precision ag meetings. I don't know, forever. That's what I do, right? So I go to the industry forward meetings often. There's a couple industry leaders I've gotten close to, and we've talked about this. Those that are farmers, the goal, and it's been a desire for over, ever since I started working, is to have a weather station in every field. But the interesting limitation for these guys who actually had the resources to buy the weather stations, it was the data that the cellular companies were going to charge for each weather station that may be sending a couple kilobytes at most, right? I mean, we're not talking data heavy, but they were going to charge like a phone for each location. So instead of, $1 per station, the conversation was like, well, I get a $400 weather station, but it's going to cost me $50 a month to send 10 kilobyte of information.
Yeah.
Is that still a holdup? Is that
That's a great question. I when I'm talking with folks who try to manage networks or monitoring systems, I always ask them, "What is your communication protocol?"
Mm-hmm.
And there have been some really good improvements, I think, in that front. We use one. I won't name names just for the sake of sponsorship or something, but we use a commercial service that is designed for IoT devices, Internet of Thing devices. And so it has a beautiful feature. It will work, as far as I know, with any cellular network in the world. You don't have to tell it in advance what cellular signals are available. It will find whatever is there and use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a great feature. And you only pay per byte of data that you transmit.
That's a key right there.
So it's really a game changer to have a service like that. And so I know of at least one, and I suspect, as we move to more and more distributed devices, these IoT type data plans will probably become more common, I hope.
Yeah, and I guess in the last couple minutes, let's spend the last couple minutes just talking about the specifics of, let's go with soil moisture. We all know when it comes to air, like so inversions for spray, wind speed, and temperature.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the usefulness of the soil data that you've done, the soil moisture, on the decisions that we have in agriculture, whether it be planting or other things?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you encounter once you measure how much water is in the soil, you immediately recognize, and anybody who's worked with soil knows it intuitively. Well, having 20% water in this sandy soil is entirely different than having 20% of water content in this clay loam. And
Mhm.
so the raw value itself is sometimes not what we need. And so we need to scale it somehow. And so in our work, the way we've done that, and it's been pretty effective, is to scale it according to the available water capacity of that soil. So soils we think about, they have kind of an upper limit, like how much water do they hold sort of when they're near saturation or when they're quite wet. We call that the field capacity sometimes. And then they have a lower limit. How much do they hold, at permanent wilting point when the plants are going to die? And so between those 2 points, that's the capacity of that soil to store
Mhm.
water. So then we measure where they are today and we express that as a percent of that capacity. And we call that the fraction of available water capacity. So it could be 0.2 or 0.3 or 0.8. It puts us somewhere in that range. And that helps us to start to think about it in terms of management. So if I'm going to be a person that's irrigating crops, I'm going to have in mind, I should have in mind a threshold. I don't want my fraction of available water to drop below this certain percentage. And
Mhm.
that'll vary some depending on the crop and where it is in its growth and maturity, and to some extent on the atmosphere. But you may think of like zero point 0.5 as a starting point. Like I don't want to drop below 0.5 fraction available water because then my plant may be experiencing water stress and that may be reducing my yield. So learning how to put that information into a variable that we can make a decision on is kind of the key.
Well, that was one of your big products that I used immediately. Was you took the Mesonet from presenting percent moisture to fractional, and then it was able to be from that point expressed to plant available.
Right.
And now instead of having 30% field capacity or what be it, we had 3 inches, and understanding. Okay, I'm going into the spring. I have in this environment potentially I have 4 inches of a plant available water, where I have half an inch. That's drastically going to change my not just fertility, but maybe I don't want to go with a corn and I delay to a soybean or a
Yeah.
sorghum just due to plant available water. And having that value is much more intuitive and easier to work with than I have 70% water in my soil.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love to be able to put that. You can express these as I've got, 2 inches of plant available water, or I've got half an inch, or I've got four. And so that also really helps to put in the context. I can think, well, how much rain am I going to need to refill this thing?
Yeah.
We can start to think like that. And one of the, I would say, a vision that I have and that I'm working towards, and I think probably many others are as well. I want to see the day where information about soil water content is as widely available and as readily understood as information about rainfall or air
Hmm.
temperature. Like this should be just a standard part of the weather that we understand and can relate to. And so it's a little bit of just building that culture of people seeing these data and understanding how to interpret those.
It's time for our famous three.
Well, Tyson, I got to wrap us up. You and I get on discussions, and I think we can go for forever in random lanes, which is what I love about this. But we're going to wrap up with my 3 standard questions. Again, we're talking with Dr. Tyson Ochsner, a soil physics research specialist at Oklahoma State University. So, Tyson, what is your go-to work resource?
Well, that's a pretty wide open question. I'm not sure how you want to define resource, but
Uh-huh.
let me say a tool that I use every day. I got to have something a system to easily take and find my notes. And so I'm a Evernote guy. I use Evernote a lot. I'm in meetings constantly. All my meeting notes are there. Uh, and it's the fact that to have it searchable. I resisted going digital for a long time. I was a
Yeah.
pencil and
Oh,
paper
yeah.
guy. I would still rather be that guy, but I cannot search my notebook. I've got 3 notebooks full of notes. I can't find stuff. So I switched to Evernote. I love it. There's other tools out there like it, but I think these days it would help most people to have something like that.
That's an amazing point. And so we laughed at that about this because I warned you ahead of time, but what's your favorite leisurely activity? And I'll put in a note that you have more than one kid. So
Yeah. So that's why I laugh, because I've got my wife and I have six children, and there's not a lot of leisure activities going on at the Ochsner household. But if I do have a moment to do
Mhm.
something just for fun, I'll probably play guitar. So it's what I enjoy doing.
And finally, where do people go to find out more about what you and your research program are doing?
Yeah, well, I'll mention a few websites maybe. So the first, just our basic one for our research program, is soilphysics.okstate.edu.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they can find some information there. The Canapeo one we talked about quite a bit. So that's canapeoapp.com. And so that's CANEPEO. And so that would be canapeoapp.com. They could go there. And then, several of our other projects have their own websites, but email me. Okay. So how about that? Will you send out my email address, or should I say it?
They can contact. It'll be shared in your contact, I believe. So
Okay. All right. Yeah. Just send me an email and I'll be happy to direct people to other resources.
Google him up, and you can find him at Oklahoma State's expert webpage along with his email address. Of that.
Yes. If you can spell Ochsner, you can find it. Good luck.
I still can't. We've been working together for a long time, and I still get spell corrected on your name every now and then. Tyson, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to visit with you and learn more about what you're doing.
Thanks, Brian. Really enjoyed it.
Well, this has been another Crop Science podcast. I'm glad you joined us. And if you like this, subscribe to this channel so you get notes and notifications on when we have a new podcast launch. Let us know what you think about it and suggest any new guests. Have a great day.